All sets of blue eyes snapped towards Lukas incredulously. "What? No way!" Mathias instantly jerked the camera back to the stranger. "But he's got legs," Emil pointed out incredulously from his perch on their luggage. "Sort of," Mathias confirmed, zooming in to focus on the ugly mottled flesh. "But you can see scales. I guess they're scales, but they kind of look like they're dissolving, don't they? They're faded out. And what the hell is that?" Lukas heaved a small sigh, navigating them through another sharp curve up the mountainous road. "Even to you, it should be obvious that he's in the middle of a change," he said, launching into informational mode. "He's somehow been stranded so far inland that he's having to rapidly adapt to survive, but this rain isn't helping. My understanding of the theory is that they must be completely dried out for the change to begin. In response to the lack of water, they excrete a gelatinous substance to protect their tail. When they can't afford to sap the last fluid resources in their own body to keep up the secretion, they start to metamorphosize, otherwise they will die. I'm guessing that it was dry out when he started to change, but then it began to rain and that slowed down the process. It will probably speed up if we get him dry enough." "And just where did you get all that?" Mathias nearly sing-songed in response to this typical Lukas information dump. "Some old book?" Emil chimed in. "Not a printed book," Lukas said firmly, obviously not appreciating the skepticism. "Journals kept by Norse fishermen in the 18th century. They wrote of countless encounters with merpeople in the Baltic Sea. They would steal fish from the nets once they figured out where the fishermen were going to be, day after day. It didn't bother some of the fishermen, since they never lost enough to damage their livelihood. They assumed the mer just wanted an easy snack. According to one man, he'd once saved a merchild who had been stranded by the low tide. He never found out how or why, just stumbled across a crying humanoid child with fused legs and a scale pattern on the flesh. He had to think fast, and decided the best course of action was to put it back into the water. He rowed it out in his boat, and helped it to hold onto the sides. Over time, the child reverted back and swam away." "Wow," Mathias said, shaking his head. "Even for your research, that's a little far-fetched." "Well," Emil said slowly, "we are on the coast of the Baltic Sea." "In Finland, not Norway," Mathias argued. "If the fisherman was Norse, then he'd be clear on the other coast. Then again, you can't really argue with this." He turned in his seat again, and got another shot of the stranger's legs. "Mathias," Berwald said again in a warning voice, actually pulling the stranger close with one huge hand holding his face, as though sheltering him from the paparazzi. "What? If he is a merman and he's changing into a freaking human, I want to document it all. This might be the very first ever video record of something like this." Berwald opened his mouth to snarl again, but Lukas cut him off. "I hate to agree with him, but I think he's right, Berwald. If nothing else, I'd be interested to keep the footage for further study." "In your face!" Mathias cheered, pumping his free fist in the air, balancing the camera in his other. Berwald looked like he was planning on skinning the other man alive, but at that moment, the merman groaned loudly, clenching his hands painfully against Berwald and drawing his attention. "That's gotta be painful," Emil muttered. "His tail had to have split into legs. Ouch." "And I'm assuming that's what's still happening now. His feet are separating and forming." Even Mathias stayed quiet after Lukas said all that, all of them horrified at what pain the merman had to be experiencing. Berwald held him a little tighter. It was a stressful half-hour drive before they arrived at the cabin. It was difficult to see in the dark, but there were a few outer lights that came on as they pulled up, showing the front of the sprawling log building. Lukas parked the car and went immediately to the back, opening it up and tossing his keys at Emil. "Go, unlock the door and turn on the lights. Get the fire going too, please. Emil nodded, and after crawling off from his mountain of bags, hurried to do as he was told. Berwald, can you manage to carry him on your own? I need to help Emil bring in the bags, and this moron's too busy filming. Lukas hooked a thumb at Mathias, who was opening the door on the merman's side and continuing to hold the camera. Plus, he added, I sense that he doesn't want to be away from you. Lukas proved to have the right of it. When Berwald moved just to get out of the car, the merman gave a sad little chirping noise, holding onto his shirt. It's okay. Just give me a minute, Berwald muttered to the stranger, before carefully lifting him onto his arms, quilt and all. They all braced themselves for more wailing, but instead, the merman just moaned loudly into Berwald's shoulder. He was holding onto the big man's neck like it was his lifeline. It was impossible with his legs straight over Berwald's arm to keep the fused limbs from jostling a little, so he was gasping and letting out little whimpers the entire way into the cabin. Our own damsel in distress, Mathias whispered to the camera, not wanting the others to overhear him. Well, he's not a damsel, but with all that hair, can you blame me for thinking so? Emil had done his job, and as they crossed to the threshold into the foyer, they were bathed in the warm, atmospheric lighting that made up just a part of the cabin's appeal. They called it a cabin, but it was really more like their own personal lodge. A fireplace sat in the corner of the huge great room under a vaulted ceiling, and Emil was going an extra step to load it with the wood that was left for the guests. Berwald set the merman down onto one of the deep sofas that sat in a cozy radius around the magnificent stone hearth. You'll warm up more when the fire gets going, Berwald told him, kneeling down to be sure he was still sufficiently wrapped up. The merman had his eyes squeezed shut, and he was still shaking all over. Berwald looked up from his position, and saw Lukas struggling to pull several of their bags through the doorway. He immediately stood up, intent on going to help. He had barely gone 2 steps before the merman let out a mournful whine, and reached out to try and grab hold of him. He couldn't quite reach, and he leaned dangerously, making Berwald catch him before he fell over. The merman latched onto him like a leech. Mathias plopped down onto the plush chair opposite the sofa, making a contented sound and zooming in on the pair. Berwald glanced at him over his shoulder before casting Lukas a helpless look. Matt, if you have to keep that thing rolling, you can set it up on the tripod or on the arm of the chair, but I need your help with the bags. Berwald's helping our guest, and could use a few more towels, I think. But his feet look a little more like feet now, Mathias said pleadingly, kneeling next to Berwald with the camera trained on the mass resting carefully on the floor, where the merman's feet should have been. The mass had shrunk down a great deal in size, and now ankles were clearly formed, the vague shape of heels just beginning to peek out from the swollen mass. The scales are almost gone. Lukas said he would change faster once he was dry, Berwald said, maneuvering in the merman's hold to sit next to him on the sofa. Now go help him, and get me towels. Oh, come on. Now, Mathias, please? Lukas called, feigning as though he was falling over from the weight of the bags. Grumbling and unable to resist his better half in need of him, Mathias placed the camera carefully on the chair, checked that it was filming at a wide enough angle, then went to help Lukas. 15 minutes later, all the bags were piled in their respective rooms. The fire was blazing, and they all gathered before it, 5 shades of blonde hair and blue eyes glinting in its light. Emil was standing behind the sofa, using a towel to try and squeeze as much water out of the merman's exceedingly long mane of hair as he could. Lukas was doing the same with the crown of his head. Berwald had wrapped him in a new blanket, the quilt from the car being too damp to be comfortable any more. Berwald was still serving as the merman's leaning post. Those shaking hands were clinging to his arm, and every few minutes he would grimace, his body twisting in pain as it continued to change. It's got to be like having your limb melted and then forged brand new, Lukas said quietly, rubbing at the merman's head gently. That's the only way I can imagine that it works. The merman squirmed with a cry and pulled helplessly at Berwald's shirt. There were quite a few wrinkles in it at this point, from where it had been clutched, tugged, and dug into. The big man placed his arm around the trembling shoulders. "Poor thing," he mumbled. "You can freaking see him changing now," Mathias said in wonder. He was stretched out on his stomach a polite distance away from the sofa, his camera watching at a close angle, as the gelatinous mass very slowly seemed to melt away and solidify into a natural shape. The substance was not falling away, but reforming. "Lukas," Berwald said quietly as they watched. "He's been shaking non-stop since we found him. He must be exhausted from it. He's not even cold anymore, but he won't stop shaking." Lukas shook his head. "I'm sorry, Berwald. I honestly don't know what else to do for him. I'd suggest trying to give him some pain meds, but we don't know right now if his physiology is completely human or still something else. We've done all that we know to do. Now we just need to wait." "He's probably shaking because he's so stressed out and hurting," Emil offered. "I know I'm anxious. I'll shake a little." "Hopefully that's true," Lukas said. "It'll wear him out, but really won't do any harm." Emil and Lukas did their best, and got the long mess of hair as dry as they could. When they were done, they spread the damp towels alongside the car quilt on the hearth. "I'm going to change into dry clothes," Lukas announced. "We have all the food put away on top of everything else. Emil, you should help me. Mathias, I tell you to help and leave our guest and Berwald alone, but I don't suppose you're going to, are you?" "No way, dude," Mathias called, never looking out from the camera's viewfinder. "I gotta capture this from start to finish, unfiltered." "Well, then look after him. Emil, let's go put our things in order and warm up the extra room for our guest. Berwald, I suggest that you try and do the same, but—" The merman gave a short cry and buried his face into Berwald's shoulder. The man patted his arm gently and gave Lukas a determined look. "All right then, we'll be back." The entire lodge was so open that they could see right into the kitchen, entranceway, and dining room. From any room there was at least a spot where every other area of the first floor was visible, so their eyes flicked up every now and again as the two brothers unpacked their coolers, stocking up their huge refrigerator, and put dry goods in the pantry. They always had to bring a week's worth of food with them, only going to the little store at the base of the mountain for snacks once or twice in the trip. This amount of food for 4 men took a long time to put away. Once Lukas and Emil had finished their tasks and changed their clothes, the merman seemed to be much calmer. He was quiet and slumped against Berwald with his eyes closed. After grimacing in pain for so long, he seemed to be exhausted and slack now. "How is he doing?" Emil asked, sitting down cross-legged by Berwald's feet. "Much better," Mathias said. "He even perked up a bit a while ago and was just staring at the fire." "He's probably never seen it before," Lukas supplied, dropping down into a nearby chair. "Probably never seen anything on land before." "Yeah, and look at his feet," Mathias urged. "They're just being held together by the big toes. A tiny bit of that flesh still hanging on. It'll snap any second now." "Yeah," Emil said, leaning closer. "Careful, don't block the shot," Mathias warned. "I've been waiting for this." He was still stretched out on his stomach, and was quite sore, but wasn't about to give up his perfect vantage point. They all fell silent as they waited, watching with bated breath. Before their eyes over the next minute, the fleshy bit holding the toes together shrunk away. With a final snap, the feet separated. The merman jolted a little at this, giving a tiny whine. The rest of them felt their jaws drop in awe. The gelatinous mound had formed into perfectly normal feet, and not even an ounce of dampness was to be seen on them. They were perfectly dry. As if sensing their eyes on him, the merman opened his own violet-blue ones and stared at them, then slowly lifted his head and leaned over to look down at his 2 new feet. "Wow," Mathias supplied scholarly. He panned the camera from the newly formed feet up to the merman's face as he observed them for the first time. His violet blue eyes were tired, but still filled with wonder as he studied his new appendages. For all his awe, he then looked a little lost, his expression falling into something like fear.